SCHD is one of, if not the most popular high dividend ETF, and this is for a good reason. SCHD has had some of the best returns from any ETF I've seen over the past decade. For many years, SCHD performed on par or even better than the S&P 500 in terms of growth alone, and did that while having a much higher dividend yield. Since 2021 though, SCHD has had a slow, almost non-existent growth and valuation, and even during this year's bull run, it has struggled. But in this video, I'm going to explain why this is and why this ETF, despite these issues, will make people millionaires over time, including yourself. Before we start this video, make sure to like and subscribe if you're new to the channel because I will be posting dividend stock videos just like this one every few days. So for the people who don't know what SCHD is, it is a high-yield ETF offered by Charles Schwab that has holdings in strong fundamental companies that focus on quality and sustainable dividends. What this basically means is that SCHD invests in companies that have had a dividend for a long time, seem like they'll continue to have this dividend for even longer, and have a good track record of growing their payments, which is an absolutely fantastic recipe for a good and sustainable ETF. To show this off, let's take a look at their top 10 biggest holdings, and one thing that is super important to know is that this ETF is super top heavy, so these holdings here make up a large amount of this ETF. As you can see, every stock here from Coke to Pepsi to Chevron matches their description of strong companies that have good dividend history. This has resulted in SCHD having a dividend yield of around 3.5%, which is extraordinary for an ETF this size. In addition, the dividend payment has increased by 550% since 2011, showing that the dividends of these companies do grow along with the ETF. Despite being very top heavy though, SCHD is still well diversified amongst many sectors, so it is a decent pickup for investors who are looking to avoid risk. It has its biggest allocation in industrials, and technology is only its fifth biggest sector. This explains why during 2023 it hasn't performed super well, as AI-driven hype has bolstered the market's returns. However, if the AI hype starts to die out, which is something that could absolutely happen, SCHD will be super well poised to stay consistent while other major indexes fall. In addition, if we ever enter another mild recession, SCHD will be less badly bruised than let's say SPY for example due to its defensive allocation, which you could have seen during the crash of 2022. Notably, SCHD's PE ratio is in the mid-13s, while the S&P 500 is in the low 20s, which means if any stocks get exposed for being overvalued in the future, SCHD will not share that burden nearly as much. This sums up why SCHD hasn't been scoring big this year during this tech-fueled bull run, but it also explains that SCHD will be better off to weather poor market conditions in the future if that happens. As I've mentioned earlier, SCHD has significantly underperformed the S&P 500 since January, mainly due to the AI hype train. However, I don't think this gap between performance is sustainable, but rather I believe that SCHD will have a broader rally. With SCHD's much more diverse allocation, I believe it to be better positioned in the broadening phase in the market, meaning for long-term investors, I think the best time to buy would be right now. Moving on to something a little different, one worry that I personally have had with ETFs in the past is their expense ratio. An expense ratio is a fee that ETFs charge to cover their costs such as advertising fees, and these expense ratios add up over time and are automatically subtracted from your portfolio no matter if the ETF has done well or not, meaning these have turned me away from ETFs before. However, SCHD has an insanely low expense ratio of just 0.06%. This is basically nothing, and therefore you really shouldn't worry about this expense ratio eating at your compound growth since it will be largely unnoticeable for your entire life. Compare this to another dividend ETF, NOBL or Noble, with an expense ratio of 0.35%, and you really start to see how good SCHD's expense ratio really is. One thing I want to briefly mention in this video is that SCHD is not one of a kind. VYM and DGROW are both similar ETFs dished out by Vanguard and BlackRock respectively. These are very similar to SCHD. They are both growth dividend ETFs that have very low expense ratios. However, SCHD is simply better. In addition to having just as good growth over time, SCHD's dividend is top class. SCHD yields 3.5%, while VYM yields 3% and DGROW yields just 2.4%. Although this difference in percentage seems small, over time this 0.5 to 1% difference can add up to thousands of dollars due to compound interest. And that is just the secret, compound interest. SCHD is not a short-term play, but for people who are wanting to collect dividend checks for the rest of their life, SCHD is a place to put your money and not have to worry. These checks may start out small, but over time with both dividend reinvestment as well as you adding more money in, these checks will continually grow over time until they can fund your retirement. The truth is, with time, most ETFs can probably make you a millionaire, not just SCHD. However, I believe SCHD can speed up this process slightly with both their high yield and proven growth. I think of SCHD as similar to Coca-Cola stock. They are good dividend payers, are super long-term plays, and are stocks you don't have to be constantly worried about due to their relatively low fluctuation. So really quickly, let's plug SCHD into a stock calculator and see the results. If you were to start off with $10,000 and invested $365 a month, which is the same as $12 a day, after 30 years at a 10% return, you would be a millionaire. Now here's the thing. This isn't entirely accurate because who knows if SCHD will return 10% every year. However, with dividends included, this is actually worse than SCHD has performed. So 10% is a conservative estimate, meaning I think this is pretty realistic. So that being said, if you started with 10 grand now, we're willing to put $12 a day for the rest of the next 30 years. After that time period, you will be a millionaire without having to worry that much. In total, SCHD is one of the best ETFs out there, and for investors who are just starting out and aren't really sure where to place their money, this ETF is your best bet. Thank you for watching this short video on SCHD. If you agree, let me know in the comments. If you disagree, let me know as well. I'd love to hear any feedback, and I'd love to hear about any ETFs that you think are better. Goodbye.